Recently, I finished watching Death Note, and it's a really good show. I highly recommend it, but it got me thinking about an old silly debate between subs versus dubs. Now the whole argument is pretty silly. It's just people arguing like the console wars. Super trivial stuff. But I think the debate can give insight into certain topics that might predict the way we see things in the future, like AI and music, for example. It's a more convoluted topic that should bring more elaboration rather than just this one is better than the other one. Let me go over a few examples to talk about so we could see what more is there to the sub versus dub debate. Back to Death Note. Now, it's a good show, one of the classics. A lot of people have watched it, from cool people to less than stellar people, if you will. It's an interesting topic to talk about dubs versus subs with, because it is one of the shows where the dub and sub are generally agreed to be equal in quality. Personally, I watched the show in dub, and I found it really funny, and you could really feel the emotions behind the voice actors, which is pretty much the whole goal of what you want in any voice acting. I would argue some characters are done better in dub than in the sub, like L and Ryuk. I find their English voices to be very well of their character, and I almost, not to say dislike the sub voices, but I feel like it's just missing that something special.
I want to tell you, I'm L.
I would say the sub Kira really does capture that voice really well.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
But, you know, as a non-Japanese speaker, it's really hard to capture the differences between Kira and his alter ego, or his alter ego. I got it mixed around, but you know, if you get it, you get it. The whole show revolves around these characters and their little inflections in dialogue, because it's a lot of talking within the show. It's an interesting concept, but there's a lot of dialogue which needs to be kind of understood to know the nuances. Starting to sound like a Redditor. Death Note is a really difficult show to talk about because any discussion about it is kind of a spoiler alert, so I won't be going too deep into it, but you know, I have like a couple favorite characters. L, Ryuk, Matsuda, they're my favorite. That's my favorite. And I think the voice acting really sells well. I pretty much will say almost all the voice actors nailed it, to be honest. Anime has like a reputation of being somewhat cringy voice acting, especially in the dub. And I didn't feel that with Death Note. I feel like it was, you know, it got silly at sometimes, but it was more like endearing kind of silly, which is the silliness you want. I said silly a lot of times back then. So Death Note is an example of where the sub and dub debate really doesn't matter, as both voice actors from both sides do an excellent job. And I think that's typical for a lot of animes. Let's talk about another show. I also recently began watching Nagatoro again. Look, I can already feel you judging me, so don't judge too hard, but I recently started watching it again, the second season, and I hate to admit, but I really enjoy the show and like all its like cringy, weird silliness. It really does make you feel like a degenerate watching, so. But I swap between dub and sub sometimes just to like see the difference between the two. And honestly, there's not much of a difference yet again. Though I do prefer the sub rather than the dub, just because of the way it flows and whatnot. And also the sub voice actor is the same for Deku, I guess. So, you know, he has still that like, awkwardness.
Some smells good in there.
A big controversy point of Nagatoro was the subtitles it had, where the translators felt like it was kind of modernizing subtitles a bit. It used like, you know, like brain rot terms to describe a lot of stuff. And honestly, I don't see why there is such a huge controversy over it, because direct translations often can be kind of confusing, if you will. So a more adapted translation I feel is better. And plus, it's like high schoolers that are in the show, so of course they would use high school language. So I don't know. Let's move on to another show that's way more clear cut. So, look, I'm a big fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Love this show. And it is, I don't want to say unwatchable, but if you watch the show in dub, you kind of lose the charm of it.
Hey, baby!
Because a huge charm of JoJo is like the silly, like Japanese English they intermix with each other, and the exaggeration and emotions that comes with the sub.
Let's kill the whole beat!
Like the dub does an alright job, but you really feel something special about the sub with JoJo. Especially with characters like Joseph, who, you know, his like, oh my god catchphrase and whatnot. It's really iconic.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
I mean, there is a reason to watch JoJo in dub if you want to like get that immersive experience, because originally a lot of the characters are English, or you know, some are Italian. Not a lot of characters in the show are Japanese, except, you know, part 4, if you will. It'd be interesting to watch a show in like lore accurate dubbing. But it'd be kind of silly for stuff like part 3, where the main cast of characters are from different parts of the world. So you wonder like, how do they talk with each other? Are they all talking English, or are they all speaking Japanese with each other? Or, you know, what's going on? Personally, my headcanon is like just the subtitles are floating underneath them and they're just reading as they go.
Jaggers!
Some scenes I want to talk about for JoJo, specifically part 6, because it's the most recent and a little bit of my favorite. I really like part 6. I know a lot of people don't, but I personally like it. And especially it gives a good insight into some of the voice acting, as one of the most iconic characters, Dio, has some lines in part 6, but Dio plays a different role in part 6 where he does in the other parts, part 3 and part 1, where Dio is seen to be one of the main villains of the show, and he has like a almost intimidating aura, and you get those like exaggerations in the other parts, especially his fight between Jotaro, where he has like that almost like cackle, if you will, like just that like giant goblin energy. What's interesting about Dio in part 6 is that you don't get that, because you get a more the other side of him, as Dio is often talked about to be an kind of convincing person, if you like, seductive, I guess is the correct term, if you will. He's talked about to be a seductive character, and it's really important that he is one, because a lot of the plot points are based around that idea that Dio is both this intimidating person, but as well as an alluring figure to look up to. And before then, you really didn't get a lot of examples before then, just like minute flashbacks that really don't sell the idea of it. But in part 6, you get a scene between Pucci, the villain of part 6, and Dio. And I feel the sub voice acting, it's nice, but you hear those like little like goblin noises that really make the voice iconic kind of sound like a little off, I guess, if you will. A little off. It's like a nitpick. But then you turn it to the dub voice acting, and he kind of sells that like Englishman attractiveness, because he is English originally. So, and you kind of get that alertness. It kind of really sells that alertness, and I found like, wow, this is kind of good actually.
You must understand, I was afraid of losing you.
Also, like the bedroom scene between Pucci and Dio is like, oh god, look. Like the stereotypes about JoJo are true. You know, it's not one I would recommend watching with your parents, because you would feel like a little awkward sitting in a room. But that is one instance I find the dub to be a little better than the sub. But I wouldn't argue for a show where it's constantly switching between back and forth, because that would kind of like, one, the cost would go up, and two, it'd be like kind of wacky doodle to do that. Other instances I like of part 6 of the voice acting are when Pucci is yelling like Joestar. I can't really talk about that, but I like that part when he yells just like ah. And also Jolene as well. She does a really excellent job yelling as well, especially after one of the fights, and she's just like yelling that guttural scream. I think the voice actor behind her actually like bled during that. So that's cool, I guess. That shows how dedicated they are. So yeah, Gojo has like a bunch of silly moments. I think it's a clear-cut example of watching in sub, but the dub does have some highlights, and I think, are worth like looking at, like, oh, that's cool. All right. I think dub and subs are a lot like Taylor's version versus her other version, stolen version, if you will. Now, if you don't know what Taylor's version is, it's Taylor Swift's re-recording of her old albums from Taylor Swift to Reputation. So she's doing like redubs, if you will, of her old albums, which is kind of interesting to listen to. Now, I'm not going to go all into details about Taylor Swift because that is a whole bag in itself. Like, oof, boy. Especially her right now, it's kind of hot water to deal with, so. But I think her music brings music is interesting. Now, the newest album, I think it's pretty boring. I'll be real. Like Fortnite's alright. Fortnite's alright, and that's about it. There's a lot of like cringy lyrics and whatnot that's not into, but let me hone in on Taylor's version versus, I'll just say, original version for this purposes. I think it mirrors the topic of subs versus dubs perfectly, where although it's the same person, Taylor Swift, it has her in different eras, if you will, between her younger self and her older self. And you could really hear those like subtle differences. Now, Taylor's version is meant to be a replacement to those original versions, but some of them do better while some do worse. Let me give a few examples. One of my personal favorites and one of our most popular is You Belong With Me. That, classic song, You Belong With Me. Hearing the two between the original and Taylor's version gives some subtle differences that really do change the meaning of the song when you listen to both of them. The original, is about young teenage girls like yearning, like, you belong with me, please, 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 like stuff like that. Taylor's version, the new one, kind of gives a more, I guess, mature look, if you will. Like, it's less of pleading and more like, you belong with me statement, kind of. Like, we were meant to be, this is it, I know it. Which kind of ages badly now. All of the songs kind of age badly. But, I have this image of Taylor in my head, and that's the true image. Not because I've never met her, okay? And I don't want to go into the lore and think about that. So I just have this imaginary Taylor in my head, like, this is it. This is who she is, and this is what she's singing about. All right? That's how I cope. Both are listenable, but they each offer different perspectives that, even though they're the same lyrics coming from the same person, they really do give that like kind of subtle emotional feel that kind of like, well, personally, I like the new version just because it has like that, it gives a more nuanced flow, and plus it's mixed better and blah, 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 blah. But there's one thing I miss from the old version, and that's like a very specific line when she's like on a park bench thinking to myself. I miss that. I miss like that country twang because, as she transitioned from country to pop, she kind of lost that like voice where the sub versus stuff, where the original and Taylor's version kind of sees that transition come to fruition. So let me talk about a more hard cut examples where the new one is not as good as the old one, and that is off one of my favorite albums, Red. Red is interesting because it kind of begins the mark between her transition between country to pop. Iconic hits like 22 just don't hit in the Taylor's version rather than the original because she kind of sounds bored in the new one. Like, you don't really believe it's fun to be 22 in the Taylor's version, where in the original version it's like, oh wow, it's cool to be 21 and stuff like that. And then you get We Are Never Getting Back Together. The new one is also worse because, I don't know, it's like the old one, the original The original felt like tongue-in-cheek. It's like, ugh, this guy sucks, but whatever, forget about it. Like, but while the new one, it's kind of feels more cynical in a way. It's less endearing. This would be all very silly if you never listened to these songs. So, and to any average listener, you probably couldn't even tell the difference because, I mean, they're meant to be replaced. They're almost identical. So, obviously, the goal works. She's making a ton of money off it anyways. So it's not like there's a huge, dispute about it. But there are some instances where the new version completely redefines the old ones, where it's like, wow. The other half of Red in Taylor's version, I think does pretty well, especially in the standout All Too Well. All Too Well in Taylor's version really does capture that different emotion that I talked about previously, where it's coming from a more mature Taylor, a more statement looking back kind of Taylor. The original Taylor came from one who was innocent and got hurt. This one is one looking back and it's like, I can't believe I was this person, how could you hurt me and whatnot. And it gives a more nuanced, more complex thing that gives, well, the original one was like, damn. Yeah, this one is like, damn. I think All Too Well, the Taylor's version is the definitive version. This one, where it makes the old one kind of unlistenable. Vice versa, the new Taylor's version of the poppy songs, the old versions were way better. So stuff like that. You could splice this and that to make the perfect Red album if you wanna, but hey. Now Red is a 50-50 where some of the songs are good, better, while some of the songs are worse. But then you have the other albums where it's this one sucks. 1984 Taylor's version, it sucks. It doesn't even hold a candle to the original. But then you have Speak Now, where the Taylor's version, it's damn, this is how you remaster an album. But like I said previously, the draw of Taylor's versions albums are just the new songs. So, kind of brings me back to my point of subs versus dubs being kind of an irrelevant topic to debate over which one is better. Because at the end of the day, it's they're just made to appeal to a general audience, more audience capture. Taylor Swift re-releasing her albums is just to make sure the money goes to her, and creation of dubbing is just to appeal to a wider range of audience who would kind of be turned off at the prospect of reading subtitles. For example, Pokemon. Pokemon was successful, especially in America, for a large part because the dubbing was really good and iconic and appealed to a lot of kids. Because can you imagine making kids wanting to read? Ugh. The dubbing did so well that many consider Pokemon not to be an anime, even though it is. Because the dubbing was accepted to be the way to watch Pokemon. So subs versus dubs have that power just to reach their general audience. That's the mainstream appeal of it. But there is a future for subs versus dubs that no one is talking about that I think brings an interesting thing. Now, I'm going to say a very scary word, so please don't run away when I say it. AI. Now, don't think of the worst thing I'm going to say. I'm going to say this. AI is not a replacement for human voice acting. You're never going to get that soul you get with AI. AI is used to create a lot of funny alternatives, I guess, if you will. Alternatives of certain videos where you have characters saying stuff that they normally wouldn't say, or mimicking other characters or singing songs and yada yada. You've seen the AI stuff. And that is just a testament to we as humans, how we find other people's voices to be interesting. If hearing other people wasn't interesting, why would you be watching this? Or why would you be watching me for this? So thank you for watching me. If you want to stick around some more, that'd be nice. So thank you for watching if you got this far, which is probably very, very, very few. So thank you. I'm looking at you specifically, thank you. But let me keep going. I'm almost closing out here. So AI is not a replacement for human voice, but it is a testament to how interesting we find the voices. An example I think is interesting is Jay Schlatt's cover of Frank Sinatra, where it was a highly memed thing of him singing stuff. Jay Schlatt as a voice is very interesting. It's very iconic, like New Yorker accent. But then hearing him sing it, actually just using his voice, it really does feel like, wow, the soul is there.
For what is a man?
Yeah, you don't get that with AI. There is a kind of like silly, endearing jankiness of AI, but that soul of the voices really does come through. And I think that's the main takeaway of subs versus dubs. It's just a preference of how that soulfulness really captures you in and really makes you think, wow, this is Kino. Now, one more point I like to bring up is some quirkiness. Don't judge me on this, but I watched almost every episode of Peppa Pig, and there's one episode where I think Mommy Pig is talking English and then other characters speaking in French. And if you switch to the French version, you'll get that Mommy Pig is speaking in French and the other character is speaking in English. And it's kind of like a funny moment between the two, where like really does you feel like that canonically, like, oh, they don't understand each other because they are speaking a different language. So that was like really neat detail that I think more shows could do with subs versus dubs.
Oh, comment allez-vous?
Allô, monsieur?
Est-ce que Delphine peut... Hello, who are you?
Hello, mister?
So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye now.